It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul.
Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today is September 24th, 2023, and the House of Commons yesterday gave a standing ovation to a Waffen SS Nazi. So, yay. That's not so good. It's not so good. And there's a big speech by Trudeau where he's being a strong man against Russia, talking about going to take Russia's assets from around the world and hand that over to Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars of it. And I'm not on board for any of this. I think that we should be brokering peace rather than fueling a war with stolen Russian money. That doesn't make Canada the good guy. How did we become a country of warmongers? What in the world happened? We've spent $9 billion, that's billion with a B, on Ukraine, and Trudeau will give the whole country if he has to. We're with Ukraine to the end, he says, which, again, no. The India conflict has escalated further. The India thing was supposedly, and somebody introduced me to a political podcast yesterday. Greg, actually, I was talking to Greg, and he said, have you seen these guys? They use this software. It's really good. And another person, unrelated, sent me those guys, the Durant, and we're going to watch them today, talking about the Modi thing, talking about the right way to do diplomacy, which is what I've been saying all along. Like, even if you had ironclad proof that India did this, the way Justin Trudeau handled this was not the way diplomacy is done between G7 countries, period. You owe each other a modicum of respect. You owe each other a phone call. Heads up, this is going to happen. And more than that. And so it's very interesting that Justin Trudeau broke that kind of protocol as well. And so I'll show you about that. But the Durant talks about Justin Trudeau, Modi, and BRICS, and they think that this whole thing was the U.S. being upset, the U.S., the West, the G7, less India, I guess. The G7 generally being upset that India was being brought into the fold in BRICS, and BRICS is operating more like a bloc now. BRICS is operating more like a team. It's being more formal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's interesting to me as well. And so I'll show you that color because I think it's interesting. Russell Brand is being attacked, and through him, free speech is being attacked, and that's scary. James Lindsay will be in Alberta. I told you before that he was coming to Alberta, and then the Eventbrite page got shut down because they said it violated his terms. But he's back. He's back with, I can't remember which group, but there's a group, and James Lindsay's got a poster, and so it should be great. It should be a wonderful thing. I'm jealous. I'd love to go see James Lindsay talk, although I have a hard time listening to people talk in regular, like in slow speed, because I listen to everything in 2-speed. So I find it slow, but at the same time, live is a different feel altogether. Although, yeah, I like it fast. I like hearing things in 2 times speed. Anyway, there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. Ezra Levent. I'd still go see James Lindsay live. I think it would be very interesting. Ezra Levent says, I hope I'm wrong. I often say that, Ezra. You watching the show? I hope I'm wrong too, buddy. He says, but I think Trudeau and Zelensky just did something terrible. They did. Not to mention wasting our money on a war that Ukraine can't reasonably win. Anyway, back to this. Let me explain it in reverse, says Ezra. 1. In 2020, Canada's leading military affairs reporter wrote an article in a military journal about how Canada brought in 2,000 Nazis after the Second World War. The Nazis were in Hitler's 14th Waffen SS Division Galactica. According to military historian, journalist David Pugliese, and I've cited him before, they were able to sneak into Canada by changing their names and hiding their past. Here's what I'm saying his name, Pugliese. I think that's probably how you say it, but sorry if I've got that wrong. Pugliese wrote in the military journal Esprit de Corps, in an attempt to hide his SS connection, the unit had changed its name in the last few days of the war to the 1st Division Ukraine National Army. There's the source for that. That was nearly 80 years ago, so most of those Nazis have since died, but one of them is apparently still alive, Yaroslav Hunka. And if I'm reading the news correctly, Trudeau invited him as an honored guest today to Zelensky's visit to Canada's Parliament. The Canadian Press Wire Service circulated this photo and caption. This version is taken from the Toronto Star, but it was in many places. Look at the caption on the bottom, and it says the name of the that was just outlined by Ezra. And it says Ezra, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Prime Minister Trudeau recognize Yaroslav Hunka, who was in attendance and fought with the 1st Ukrainian Division in the Second World War before later immigrating to Canada, in the House of Commons on Friday. Can this really be true? Did Justin Trudeau really invite a Nazi SS soldier from the Second World War to Parliament as an honored guest? Please tell me I've got a fact wrong here. Hunka was introduced to Parliament as a 98-year-old soldier who fought against the Russians and as a hero. 3 months ago, we'll watch that in a minute. 3 months ago, Trudeau went to Ukraine and met with Andriy Melnik, a Holocaust denier who was fired by Zelensky after he said Israel and Poland were lying about the Jewish deaths. And last year, Freeland held up a scarf promoting far left. Ezra says far right, but far left, because Nazis were far left, right? Ukrainian nationalist movement linked to neo-Nazis, commemorating Stefan Bandera, the Nazi criminal. Freeland deleted her social media post, but not before the photo was saved. Before the Russian invasion in 2022, David Pugliese wrote about Trudeau and Freeland working with Nazi groups in Ukraine. Here are 2 of his stories from November 2021. Those articles were published in the Ottawa Citizen. Here's an article in the Globe and Mail about Freeland's grandfather, a Nazi propagandist. She tried to keep that a secret for years and then claimed it was Russian propaganda. Trudeau and Freeland routinely call peaceful domestic political critics Nazis and far right and racist. They're not, of course. They just disagree. It's Trudeau and Freeland who really do have a Nazi problem, and it's coming from inside the Liberal House. Right? Here's UNN confirming what Ezra was hoping that he was wrong about, and UNN says a 98-year-old was given a standing ovation by the Canadian Parliament during Zelensky's speech. He was hailed as a hero for fighting against the Russians. Yaroslav Hunka fought for the 14th Division of the Waffen-SS. And so, I mean, right? Like, I think this is very interesting. Here's standing ovation. I have family that fought in the Second World War on the side of the Allies, not on the side. And so, like, the Russians were the Allies, right? So not on the side of the Nazis. So on the opposite side to the person that the Canadian government is clapping for here. So that's concerning, I would say. Here is that.
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War.
So whose side does that put him on there? CTV? Here's the Canadian files, and they are confirming the same thing. AP News confirming that the 98-year-old veteran giving a standing ovation by Canadian Parliament is Yaroslav Hunka, who fought for the 14th Division of the Waffen-SS. Canadian Parliament gave a standing ovation to an outright Nazi collaborator, first noticed by this person. So there you go. And that's concerning. That's very, very concerning, don't you think? Here is Justin Trudeau. The amazing Zoltan says, Justin Trudeau is so unhinged, it's not funny anymore. This is him saying, we will give Ukraine everything. We will give them everything in order to win, which is crazy. Jason is responding to this speech. First, Jason says, in his mind, this was his Churchill moment. This was his battle cry. Before he walked up to the podium, he told himself he had to speak with passion. He had to be convincing. This would be the performance of the century for a Canadian Prime Minister. He practiced this speech in the mirror. He worked on his tone and his inflections to make sure it would be pitch perfect. At the end of this clip, you can see a twinkle in his eye. He thinks he nailed it. In reality, this is a rendition of Hitler speaking at the Reichstag in 1933 as performed by a local theater troupe. This is rhetoric designed to have maximum impact, but becomes comical when delivered by an empty vessel. It reeks of vapidity and inauthenticity. It lands with all the weight of a jellyfish floating in an ocean current. The world is laughing at us. Okay, so this is Trudeau's little speech yesterday to, he's in a room filled with Canadian Ukrainians, and he's talking about how he's going to support Ukraine to the end. Here we go.
Canadians know this is a question of right or wrong. Canadians know that, yes, it is incredibly hard for Ukraine to continue to stand against a Russian aggression. And let's be honest, It's hard for the democracies around the world who are there to support their citizens, who are investing for the future, who are challenged with a challenging economy around the world, to continue to step up as Canada has with close to $9 billion in aid for Ukraine. But we will, because the cost on Canadians, on our lives, on our world will be so much greater if Putin wins this war, that we will and have to stand every single day until Ukraine wins this war. Canadians.
It was very distracting, the injury or whatever was on his forehead, and they zoomed in super close on his face, and it looks like he's Fat Trudeau again. So it's weird. Viva Fry says mercy killings at record numbers, medical experimentation on citizens, safe and effective citizen, detaining vectors of disease in government facilities, limitation of rights based on medical status, and now this unhinged, maniacal march towards war. The similarities are scary. So I don't think this is at all what Canadians want. Why aren't we brokering peace? Unacceptable Canadian Girl says Ukraine has received over $150 billion. Over $9 billion of that has come from Canada. This needs to stop. $9 billion? Billion with a B? Here is Justin Trudeau talking about spending another $650 million over the next 3 years for Ukraine. This war isn't meant to end. It's supposed to be a forever war, and we're supposed to fund it with our labor and our taxes. And our taxes, I don't think, are a drop in the bucket to what we're spending, right? I think that our taxes don't matter at all compared to the money being printed to keep up with the spending that these crazy lunatics are doing. Here is Justin Trudeau justifying another $650 million. Now, this injury thing happened a little while ago, right? What happened? How is this still so prominent? Did somebody re-injure him while he was sleeping or something? Here we go.
Monsieur President Zelensky, I have clearly said that our government will stand by you for as long as it takes. Canada has provided nearly $9 billion in military, financial, and humanitarian support to Ukraine since Putin began his war of aggression.
We are making a longer-term, multi-year commitment that provides predictable, steady support to Ukraine. It will include $650 million over 3 years for 50 armored vehicles, including medical evacuation vehicles that will be built by Canadian workers in London, Ontario. We'll also send F-16 trainers for pilots and for maintenance so Ukrainians are able to maximize their use of donated fighter jets.
We will continue to work with our partners, including within NATO, to provide unwavering support, and we will continue to provide economic support to Ukraine over the next year so that it remains a strong, dynamic, and prosperous democratic country. But our greatest hope is that you won't need military or financial support for long, and that peace returns soon.
I don't think he's sincere in that. It doesn't sound sincere, right? Carrying on, Jeremy McKenzie says, I never thought I would live to see a time when Canada was unanimously a pro-war country, but this isn't really Canada anymore, is it? They cannot fathom the consequences of what they're asking for. I fear that's true, and the government is acting on our behalf, and that is not good. Here's Justin Trudeau talking about how we being Canada or NATO, I'm not exactly sure, but implying that Justin Trudeau would have something to do with it. So Canada would be helping in stealing money from around the world and giving it to Ukraine, stealing Russian assets and money from around the world and giving it to Ukraine to fight against Russia. Here we go.
We are looking very carefully at how we can ensure that Russia itself is paying for the devastation they're causing in Ukraine. We've announced today a working group we'll look to create to see if things like Russian central bank assets, which total $200 or $300 billion in Europe and in the United States primarily, could be set to actually support Ukraine in this fight and indeed help over the long term to restore the prosperity and peace for the people of Ukraine.
It seems like a super villainy thing to do. Listen, what we're going to do is we're going to see these people. We don't like these people. So we're going to take their stuff and we're going to sell it. And then we're going to take the money we get from their stuff and we're going to give it to their enemy. That's our idea? Like, you need to have the supervillain fingers and a maniacal laugh or something like that. It seems like a supervillain's plan. It seems like something the good guys would fight against. But here we are. That's our prime minister. We're going to go steal the Russians' stuff and we're going to give that $200 billion to Ukraine to restore their, economy and stuff. But if we can't do that, we'll give them all of the rest of Canada too. Here's Julian Assange explaining that this is supposed to be a forever war. He's talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. Of course, those wars aren't happening anymore. So we have to have new wars like Ukraine and, Africa. Here we go.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war. Because the goal is
a successful war? I mean, what is a successful war? Where the good guys win? Aren't who the good guys are kind of subjective, depending on where you live, et cetera, et cetera? So the good guys winning. And sure, nobody wants to be subjugated. There have been terrible, awful dictators in history that have necessitated maybe the use of force to free their populations. But it doesn't seem like that's what we're doing right now. It doesn't seem like Russia's subjugating Ukrainians. It seems like there's a lot more to this conflict, and the powers that be would want us to believe that it's very simple. Russia bad, Russia real bad, and don't ask questions, that's racist. I'm not there. Here's what happened when Zelensky showed up in Toronto. It's kind of loud, so I'll turn this down. Here we go. There are multiple competing bullhorns. People are telling people, we do not like you, Zelensky. F you. We do not like you, Trudeau. F you too. Very interesting. Here's a gentleman who got multiple $500 fines for using bullhorns to express his displeasure. I think this is Ottawa, but it might be Toronto. Here we go.
I was on Wellington Street earlier today using my megaphone to oppose the war machine. And the way I do on Wellington Street every single day for about the last 600 in a row. And the Brute Squad came over, the bylaw guys, and gave me a $400 ticket as a noise violation to stop me from saying stop the war machine. And this reveals the levels of our opponents. They are so pro-war that one man standing with a megaphone saying stop the war machine prompted them to come and silence me with 6 officers and a $400 ticket. And I'm happy to have my time in the system with my other brothers and sisters. I know my way around the courtroom, and I can't wait to see a judge. And I'm headed back up to the Hill to use my megaphone again today, the same way I do every single day. They can't stop us.
They can't stop us. Blade Runners. Right? They can't stop them either. And they have no idea what to do. I read a 4chan text yesterday, and it was basically, they have no idea what to do with you. All of the national security elites have absolutely no idea what to do with the memers and the 4chaners and the ship posters. The people who sit there and go, oh yeah, I bet aliens is next. And the thing is, they're so skeptical, and they make a good argument. If you sift through the garbage on 4chan, you can find a good argument. Gosh darn it. And what ends up happening is the lurkers who are working on behalf of the elites end up getting radicalized themselves into truth, because that's kind of what the push is, truth, sometimes, depending. But again, a matter of perspective as well, right? But the workers who are supposed to be working on sliding the boards or taking control of the conversation on 4chan end up themselves saying, these guys are right. Because a lot of times they're right. So It's very, very interesting. And the powers that be have no idea what to do with them. They can't stop them, just like they can't stop this guy. He's willing to say, okay, I'll stop right now, but I'll be back tomorrow, you know? Here's Trudeau again. This is Justin Trudeau's own tweet. He says, yesterday we showed President Zelensky and the world that their support of Canada and Canadians for Ukraine is unwavering, and it always will be. This is Justin Trudeau, gray checkmark account. It's a minute 28. I don't really want to listen to Trudeau. I don't really want to listen to him anymore, but this is the event he was at that I showed you the earlier speech from, where they zoomed in on his face because he's got that injury thing on his forehead that doesn't seem to be healing. Here is just a little bit of this.
It is so good to see all of you, but it is mostly so good to see so many strong Ukrainian Canadians here to stand for Ukraine.
Propaganda. The propaganda machine supports the war machine, right? Zelensky is explaining in this clip why elections aren't possible, and he says basically that the population doesn't tolerate any spending that's not spent on weapons. It's in the second half. I'll just play this little part here.
The society is responding harsh whenever the parliament or the government is willing to, to allocate money to a certain direction, which is different from weapons. I mean,
we couldn't possibly do an election because it's not weapons. So, that's the only thing that matters to the population. Democracy, that's secondary to weapons. Mark Gerritsen is trying to shame Pierre Poilievre for not clapping enough for Zelensky. He's clapping, but he's not clapping enthusiastically enough. This happened during Nazi Germany as well. I think there was like 4 hours of people standing there clapping because nobody wanted to be the first one to stop clapping, because the first person to stop clapping is kind of gets in trouble, could spend a night in jail, or, followed a favor with the party. And if you followed a favor with the party, well, you can't get food, and your social credit score plummets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Gerritsen is trying to police Pierre Poilievre for his enthusiasm. And he says this: the man, Zelensky, has spent the last year and a half fighting for one of the largest military forces in the world, and the best Poilievre can do is give a half-hearted round of applause for the president of Ukraine. He's incredulous. Look at how unenthusiastically Pierre Poilievre is clapping for the leader of Ukraine. I bet he clapped even less enthusiastically for the Waffen SS guy. I don't think I would have stood up. I don't know that I would have shown up. I don't know that I would have been there at all, right? If I was the leader of the opposition, I maybe would have ordered all of my MPs not to be there either. And I would have said, we're withholding our support for any more money, and I can't believe that we're talking about this. And why is this person on Canadian soil? What is the strategic benefit of spending any of this money in Ukraine? Why are we doing this? Why? Here's Pierre Poilievre shaking hands with Mr. Zelensky and introducing him to Denise Batters, who has Ukrainian heritage. Here we go.
Mr. President, I'm Pierre Poilievre, leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition. I'm proud to come originally from Western Canada, where there are many proud Ukrainians who helped build our country. One of them is Senator Batters, who is with me here today. He represents neighboring Saskatchewan. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Awkward. It's pomp and circumstance, and I think it means nothing. I think it's ridiculous. I don't think there's a reason that Canada should be funding a foreign war in another country. If we fund NATO at 2%, and NATO, with the 2% funding, wants to go and defend Ukraine, then that's a conversation after Ukraine becomes a NATO member, not before. And now it seems like Canada is shrugging off its NATO responsibilities, sending money directly to Ukraine, and wasting time of senators and politicians and MPs to kiss this guy's ass to send him $500 billion, $650 million right now? So a half billion dollars. And we're sending $9 billion total. And have you voted on that? I didn't vote on that. And I think I'd probably vote no. I would probably vote to get these people back to work as well. What are you doing wasting our time eating cake with this guy? Like, what? How does this make any sense whatsoever? I don't think it does. And people are done with Trudeau. They don't like Trudeau. But I'm trying to say that Mr. Poilievre is completely missing an opportunity to really differentiate himself against the uniparty that is bringing us into central bank digital currencies, forever wars, the Ukraine-Russia conflict currently that it's orchestrating, et cetera, et cetera. And Pierre Poilievre's playing right along, right? And it's not, I think that's a red flag, but apparently the Canadian public don't. Now, yesterday I showed you, I saw a poll with the CPC at 42, the Liberal Party at 22, and the NDP at like 19 or something like that. I don't know why it's -9. And it only had 600 people in the poll. And I thought that's not enough to be representative. That's a straw poll at best. And it's not even as big as like the Iowa straw poll or anything like that. Like, I think the Iowa fair has more people than 600 people, which is why it's looked at as something that may be indicative of a presidential candidacy or election. So regardless of all of that, there is no number of people. This is September 19th to 21st. Today's the 24th, as I said. And they've got the CPC at 55%. That's up 22 points. The NDP down 9 points at 20%. The Greens at 11%, which is very, very interesting. The Greens are above the Liberals, who are at 9%, and the People's Party is at 5%. I just don't know what the sample size is. I don't know if this is, this is British Columbia federal polling from September. Okay, well, I guess that's the sample size. So this is British Columbia. That's pretty incredible. I guess the Greens are a little bit different in British Columbia. So I guess I missed that. I didn't look closely enough. But Stephen says, every part of Canada is rejecting Justin Trudeau. Do people feel the same where you live? I think yes, generally. But we're going from one to the other because they're both the same uniparty. And I think people don't see it. People want to believe that Pierre Poilievre will be a great leader for Canada and will stop all this nonsense. And I'm concerned that he's not going to. And I mean, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not going to convince British Columbia that they should go with another party, right? Like, the argument is being had in the public sphere, and it's being manipulated by how the media covers Pierre Poilievre, by a whole bunch of different factors. And it's interesting to watch because it seems like previously the media would say, no matter what, the leader of the opposition is racist, very Trump-like, so on and so forth. And now we're seeing polls that are favorable. We're seeing all sorts of different things that are saying that, he's pretty okay, that Pierre Poilievre. So I think that changing of the guard is in process. Viva Fry says, he's clapping with lackluster enthusiasm, will say Pierre Poilievre supporting sycophants. He's a war whore like the rest of them. The war whores are very much at home in the parliamentary brothel. So everybody loves a good war. Everybody profits off a good war, right? Not least of which Ukraine. Here is, this is Colombian President Gustave Petro had to say at the United Nations, and it's in his native tongue, so I'm going to read what he's saying, so apologies if it takes a minute, but here we go. He says, they're forgetting that, the G7 is forgetting that. For oil, they invaded Iraq, Syria, Libya. They're forgetting that for the same reasons they used to defend Zelensky are the very same reasons which should be used to defend Palestine. They forgot that to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, he knows what they are, all wars must be brought to an end. But they help to wage one war in particular because it suits the world power in its Game of Thrones, in its Hunger Games. And they forgot to end the other war because it's inconvenient for the world power to end it. What's the difference between Ukraine and Palestine, I ask? Isn't it time to end both wars and other wars and take advantage of this short time to build paths to save life on the planet? So it's never been about any of that. I think that it's interesting that he's talking about the other wars that the powers that be are allowing to continue. And he says, for the Sustainable Development Goals, all wars must come to an end. The Sustainable Development Goals are not saying all wars must come to an end, there will be peace. They're saying all wars must come to an end. You will all fall in line with our United Nations one world government agenda. That's what they're saying. I don't feel like they're saying, kumbaya, we'll all live in peace because we can't have war because war's bad and it's wrong. Because the Second World War, if you ask a veteran who's on the Allied side, if it was a war that was virtuous, they would say yes, right? They would say it was necessary to preserve peace in our way of life and so on and so forth, right? So like, it's, oh man, it's such an interesting thing to say wars must be abolished in order to achieve this SDG. But the SDGs in and of themselves are a war against the way of life that we currently live. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to canadapoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful